A black divorced Maid calls a billionaire and says his son is unconscious on the street. The security footage revealed a truth more dangerous than any robbery. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning your destruction. What would you do if your child's life depended on trusting someone you'd never really seen? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The billionaire's son was dying on a rain-soaked Atlanta street, and the only person who knew why was the woman he paid to clean his toilets. Richard Lawson's hands gripped the Mercedes steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white against the Italian leather. Rain hammered the windshield like bullets, and every red light felt like a death sentence. The call from Yolanda had come 20 minutes ago, her voice shaking with words that didn't make sense. "Mr. Lawson, you need to come now. It's about your son." His son had left the penthouse an hour earlier in a black SUV with his bodyguard. Safe. Protected. Everything Richard's money could buy to keep danger away from the only thing that mattered. But now Marcus, 17 years old and his whole world, was sprawled unconscious on some sidewalk in East Atlanta, and somehow his maid knew about it before he did. The Mercedes screeched around the corner onto Memorial Drive, and Richard saw the ambulance lights painting the wet asphalt red and blue. Police cars, paramedics, and there, standing in the rain like she belonged in this chaos, was Yolanda. Her uniform was soaked through, dark hair plastered to her face, but her eyes found his immediately. "What happened?" Richard demanded, slamming the car door behind him. "I don't know everything," Yolanda said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "But he's alive. They're working on him now." Richard pushed past the paramedics to see his son. Marcus lay on a stretcher, his expensive watch missing, shirt torn, and his face pale as death. But what stopped Richard cold was the envelope clutched in the boy's hand, an envelope that looked exactly like the ones his lawyer used. "Sir, we need to get him to Grady Hospital," the paramedic said. As they loaded Marcus into the ambulance, Richard's mind raced with questions that had no good answers. His son had been safe in the penthouse. He had bodyguards. He had every protection money could buy. So how did he end up here? And why did Yolanda, a woman who cleaned his floors and emptied his trash, know about it first? What would you do if your child's life depended on trusting someone you'd never really seen? Have you ever misjudged someone because of their job or background? Richard was about to discover that survival sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. But would he listen to Yolanda's truth or let his prejudice destroy his family? The drive to the hospital felt like drowning in slow motion. Richard followed the ambulance through Atlanta traffic, his mind jumping between worst-case scenarios and the one question that wouldn't leave him alone. How did his maid know his son was in trouble before his own security team? At the hospital, as doctors rushed Marcus into emergency surgery, Richard found himself standing next to Yolanda in the waiting room. She'd changed out of her wet uniform into jeans and a sweater, and for the first time in 3 years of employing her, he really looked at her. Not as the invisible woman who cleaned his house, but as a person who'd somehow saved his son's life. "I called you as soon as I found him," she said quietly. "How did you know where to look?" Yolanda's eyes met his, and he saw something there he'd never noticed before: intelligence, determination, and fear. "Because someone needed to be watching out for him, Mr. Lawson, and it wasn't going to be you." The words hit him like a physical blow, mostly because they were true. Hit subscribe if you've ever been judged by your circumstances. This story will change how you see everyone around you. As the doctors worked to save Marcus, Richard stared at the envelope still clutched in his son's hand. The one that looked exactly like the divorce papers he'd filed in secret just 3 days ago. Papers that only 3 people knew about: him, his lawyer, and the wife he was planning to leave. But as paramedics had loaded his son into the ambulance, Richard had seen something that made his blood run cold. Yolanda's teenage nephew Marcus. The boy shared his son's name, hiding behind a dumpster with blood on his hands and terror in his eyes. The boy had whispered 3 words that stopped Richard's heart. "He knows everything." The security footage revealed a truth more dangerous than any robbery. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning your destruction. Detective Williams pulled Richard aside as doctors worked on Marcus. The hospital corridors smelled like disinfectant and desperation, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, while Richard's world came apart in slow motion. "Mr. Lawson, we need to talk," the detective said, holding a tablet. "The security footage from the incident shows something you're not going to like." Richard's stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" "There was no robbery. Your son wasn't jumped by strangers." Williams swiped the screen, showing grainy footage of Marcus stumbling down the street, clearly drugged or injured, while a teenage boy helped him. "This kid here, he's not attacking your son. He's trying to help him." "That's Yolanda's nephew," Richard said, recognizing the boy who'd been hiding behind the dumpster. "We figured. The question is, help him from what?" Williams swiped to another angle. The footage showed Marcus falling, the envelope scattering its contents across the wet sidewalk. Richard's heart stopped as he recognized the letterhead, his divorce attorney's office. The papers he'd filed against Victoria, his wife of 15 years, were scattered on the street like evidence of his secret plan. "Someone inside your house leaked those documents, Mr. Lawson. Your son was carrying them when he collapsed. Question is, was he running from someone or running to warn someone?" Richard's mind raced back through the events. Marcus had left the penthouse with his bodyguard, supposedly going to a friend's house. But the SUV never made it there. And somehow, Yolanda knew to look for him on Memorial Drive, 20 minutes away from anywhere Marcus was supposed to be. "I need to speak with Yolanda," Richard said. "She's in interview room 2. Been there for an hour, answering questions about how she knew where to find your son." Williams paused. "She's been protecting that kid of hers, but she's also been protecting yours. Question is, from who?" Richard found Yolanda sitting across from another detective, her hands folded on the metal table like she was in church instead of being interrogated. When she saw him through the glass, something shifted in her face, relief mixed with fear. "Can I have a moment with her?" Richard asked. Inside the room, Yolanda looked smaller than she did in his house, but there was steel in her spine that he'd never noticed before. "Your wife knows about the divorce papers," she said before he could speak. The words hit him like ice water. "How do you?" "Because she asked me to help her destroy you. And I said yes." "Have you ever discovered that someone you loved was plotting against you?" Drop a comment about trust and betrayal. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Richard stared at the woman who'd cleaned his house for 3 years, who knew where he kept his coffee and how he liked his shirts folded, who had somehow become part of a conspiracy against him. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because your son figured it out. Victoria's been planning this for months, maybe longer. The divorce papers were just the beginning. She's been moving money, copying files, setting up accounts." Yolanda's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. "Marcus found out about it 3 days ago. He was trying to warn you. And you helped Victoria do this to me?" "I helped her because I needed this job. Because I have 2 kids and no other options. Because she promised me money if I kept her informed about your business meetings, your phone calls, your schedule." Yolanda looked directly at him. "But I drew the line at hurting a child." Richard felt the ground shifting under his feet. His wife plotting against him. His maid caught between survival and conscience. His son trying to protect him from his own mother. "What else do you know?" "Everything," Yolanda said quietly. "I know about the offshore accounts Victoria's been feeding. I know about the hotel contracts she's been sabotaging. I know about the man she's been seeing for 8 months." She paused. "And I know she's planning to have you killed." The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Richard stared at Yolanda, trying to process words that sounded like something from a movie, not his real life. "She what?" "The same man who drugged your son tonight. The same man who was supposed to make it look like Marcus died in a car accident, with those divorce papers on him. Make it look like you were so distraught about the divorce that you couldn't live without him." Yolanda's voice broke slightly. She wanted you both gone. When Richard demanded to know how Yolanda knew about his secret divorce filing, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "Because she asked me to help her destroy you. And I said yes." But now, sitting in this sterile room with his son fighting for his life down the hall, Yolanda had crossed a line that Victoria never saw coming. She'd chosen to save the family she'd been paid to destroy. "There's more." Yolanda said quietly. Victoria doesn't know I have copies of everything. Bank records, phone calls, meeting notes. Everything she thought she was hiding. She reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. Your wife made one mistake, Mr. Lawson. She thought the help was too stupid to keep receipts. She'd been invisible in his house for 3 years, but Yolanda had seen everything, including the one secret that could bring down Atlanta's most powerful man. 3 months earlier, Yolanda had been polishing the crystal vase in Victoria's bedroom, the same Waterford piece she'd cleaned 1,000 times before. But this time, her cloth caught on something tucked behind the base. A burner phone, sleek and black, hidden where only someone who cleaned every inch of the room would find it. The smart thing would have been to put it back and pretend she'd never seen it. But Yolanda had been surviving on smart choices her whole life, and smart choices kept you broke and powerless. So she'd taken pictures of the call log, the text messages, the contact labeled only as J. The messages told a story that made her stomach turn. Plans to transfer money from Richard's business accounts. Discussions about handling the husband problem permanently. Detailed information about Marcus's schedule, his routes to school, his bodyguard rotations. Victoria wasn't just planning to leave Richard. She was planning to destroy him completely and take his son with her. Yolanda had been cleaning houses since she was 16, working her way through community college and then dropping out when her first child was born. She'd learned to be invisible in rich people's homes, to see everything and say nothing, to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity they allowed her to keep. But this was different. This was about a child. That night, Yolanda had made a decision that went against every survival instinct she'd developed. She'd started keeping her own records. Every conversation she overheard. Every document Victoria asked her to copy by accident. Every meeting Victoria had in the house while Richard was at work. She'd been building a case without even knowing it. The first time she asked me to help, I thought it was just divorce stuff, Yolanda explained to Richard in the hospital room. Rich people get divorced all the time. I figured it wasn't my business to judge how messy it got. The penthouse's marble floors had echoed with Victoria's high heels as she'd cornered Yolanda in the kitchen 3 months ago. Victoria had been beautiful in that cold, perfect way that money could buy. Blonde hair that never moved, skin that never showed wear, clothes that cost more than Yolanda made in 6 months. I need you to do something for me, Victoria had said, her voice sweet as poison. It's about Richard. He's been difficult lately. Secretive. I just need to know what he's up to. Yolanda had known it was wrong. But Victoria had been holding an envelope, cash, more than Yolanda's monthly salary. And her daughter needed new school clothes, and the rent was due. And survival sometimes meant compromising pieces of your soul. What kind of help? Yolanda had asked. Just tell me when he makes phone calls. What kind of meetings he has. If any lawyers come to the house. Victoria had smiled. It hadn't reached her eyes. Nothing illegal. Just information. For 2 months, Yolanda had fed Victoria small pieces of information. Richard's meeting with his accountant. The day his lawyer came to the house. When he worked late or came home early. But then she'd found the second phone. And the third. And the notebook Victoria kept hidden in her jewelry box, full of account numbers and dates, and a timeline that ended with R and M handled permanently. R and M. Richard and Marcus. I tried to quit, Yolanda told Richard. 3 weeks ago, I told her I couldn't help anymore, that I needed to focus on my own kids. Victoria's response had been swift and brutal. Photos of Yolanda's nephew Marcus, the boy who shared a name with Richard's son, walking home from school. Her daughter playing in their apartment complex parking lot. Her own address written in Victoria's neat handwriting. She made it clear that I could help willingly, or my family would pay the price, Yolanda said quietly. But when I realized she was planning to hurt your son, to hurt a child, I couldn't do it anymore. What would you do if you were caught between loyalty to your job and protecting your family? Tell me in the comments. The hospital room felt smaller as Richard processed what Yolanda was telling him. His wife, the woman he'd been married to for 15 years, who'd given birth to his son, who slept next to him every night, had been planning to kill them both. The night your son found those divorce papers in Victoria's study, he called me. Yolanda continued. He was scared. He said his mom had been acting weird for months, and he'd started paying attention. He'd seen her with phones she wasn't supposed to have. He'd heard conversations that didn't make sense. Marcus had been smarter than any of them realized. While Richard worked 16-hour days building his hotel empire, and Victoria played the perfect society wife, their 17-year-old son had been noticing things that didn't add up. He asked me if I knew anything about what his mom was planning. And Yolanda's voice broke. I told him everything. Because someone needed to protect him, and it sure wasn't going to be the adults who were supposed to love him. That's when Yolanda had made the decision that saved both their lives. She'd given Marcus copies of everything she'd collected. Bank records, phone logs, meeting notes, photographs. Evidence of a conspiracy that went deeper than divorce and reached into murder. He was supposed to meet me tonight at my apartment. Bring the evidence somewhere safe until we could figure out how to get it to police without Victoria knowing. Yolanda wiped her eyes, but someone got to him first. As Yolanda finished explaining Victoria's plan, Richard's phone buzzed with a message that made his blood run cold. The maid knows about the offshore accounts. Handle it, or I will. Victoria knew that Yolanda had switched sides, and now both their lives were in danger. The enemy of your enemy becomes your ally, even when she's the woman you never bothered to truly see. Richard stared at the text message from his wife, the words glowing like a threat on his phone screen. Handle it, or I will. After 15 years of marriage, he was finally seeing Victoria for who she really was, and it terrified him more than any business deal gone wrong ever had. She knows you told me, he said, showing Yolanda the message. Yolanda read it without flinching, but Richard saw her hands tighten into fists. Then we don't have much time. For the first time since they'd been in this hospital room, Yolanda smiled. Not the polite, invisible smile she wore while cleaning his house, but something real and fierce. Mr. Lawson, your wife threatened my children. She's trying to kill you and your son. I'd say that makes us partners in this mess. Richard had spent his entire adult life making decisions that affected millions of dollars and thousands of employees, but he'd never felt more out of his depth than he did right now. The woman he'd barely noticed for 3 years was offering to help him take down his wife, and she was the only person in the world he could trust. What do you need from me? He asked. First, we need to get the evidence Marcus had to somewhere safe. If Victoria's people find it, we're both dead. Yolanda stood up from the plastic hospital chair. Second, we need to get to my apartment and move my kids somewhere she can't reach them. And then we make sure your son survives this, and we put your wife where she belongs. The drive to Yolanda's apartment in East Atlanta was the first time Richard had been in that part of the city in 15 years. Rain still pounded the Mercedes windshield, and every red light felt like giving Victoria more time to cover her tracks or hurt someone else they cared about. Turn left here, Yolanda said, directing him through a neighborhood of older apartment buildings and corner stores with metal grates over the windows. Richard had imagined Yolanda's life in abstract terms. The help lived somewhere else, had family somewhere else, existed somewhere else when they weren't making his life more comfortable. But driving through her neighborhood, seeing the place she called home, made her real in a way that uncomfortable him and fascinated him at the same time. This is it, she said, pointing to a 3-story brick building that had seen better decades. The apartment building had the kind of stairs that creaked warnings about who was coming, and hallway lights that flickered like dying stars. But when Yolanda unlocked apartment 2B and stepped inside, Richard felt like he'd walked into a different world. Books stacked on every available surface. Not the leather-bound decorations that filled his penthouse, but worn paperbacks and library books with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. Her daughter's honor roll certificates covered one wall like diplomas of hope. Photos of family barbecues and birthday parties and school plays created a collage of a life lived fully on very little money. Mom, a girl's voice called from the back bedroom. It's me, baby. Come here for a minute. Yolanda's daughter appeared in the hallway, maybe 14, with her mother's dark eyes and a wariness that kids shouldn't have to carry. Behind her, a boy about 10 peeked around the corner. This is Mr. Lawson, Yolanda said. The man I work for. We need to talk about staying somewhere else tonight. Why? the girl asked, but her eyes were already scanning Richard's expensive clothes and worried expression, putting together pieces that spelled trouble. Because sometimes adults make mistakes that affect kids, and we need to keep you safe while we fix them, Yolanda said. Richard watched Yolanda with her children and saw something he'd been missing for 3 years. This wasn't just his maid, the invisible woman who cleaned up his messes. This was someone's whole world. Someone who came home every day to kids who needed her, who counted on her, who looked at her like she could solve any problem that came up. She moved through her small apartment with the same efficiency she brought to his penthouse. But here she was confident in a way he'd never seen before. This was her kingdom, and she was the queen of making something beautiful out of not enough money and too much worry. "We need to pack quickly," Yolanda told her kids. "And we're going to stay with Aunt Carmen for a few days." As her children packed their clothes, Yolanda turned to Richard. "I need you to understand something. These are my babies. They come first before you, before your son, before stopping Victoria. If it comes down to choosing between their safety and helping you, I'll choose them every time." "I wouldn't expect anything else," Richard said. "Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their job? Share your story below." The moment he said it, Richard realized something had shifted between them. Not the polite distance between employer and employee, but the respect between two people who would do anything to protect their children. "There's something else you need to know," Yolanda said, pulling a manila envelope from behind the refrigerator. "Your son didn't just find evidence about Victoria's affair and the money laundering. She handed him photographs that made his stomach turn. Victoria meeting with men Richard didn't recognize. Bank statements from accounts he'd never seen. And photos of Marcus, his son, taken with a long lens, walking to school, playing basketball, sitting in restaurants. She's been planning this for over a year," Yolanda said quietly. "Maybe longer." Richard stared at surveillance photos of his own son and felt something break inside his chest. The woman he'd married, the mother of his child, had been hunting Marcus like prey, documenting his habits and routines like a predator planning an attack. How many people know about this? "Just us, your son, and Victoria's boyfriend, the man she's been working with." Yolanda pulled out another photo, a man Richard recognized from hotel industry events. Jonathan Mills. He owns 3 hotels in Miami, and he's been trying to buy into the Atlanta market for 2 years. "I refused to sell to him 6 months ago. Because you're smart." But Victoria saw an opportunity to get revenge for both of them. The plan was more elaborate than Richard had imagined. Victoria seducing him into marriage 15 years ago, waiting until his business was worth killing for, then systematically destroying him while appearing to be the grieving widow. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman who cleaned her house and overheard her conversations. As they prepared to leave Yolanda's apartment with her children, Richard's phone rang. The caller ID made his blood freeze. "Grady Hospital. Mr. Lawson? This is Dr. Rodriguez. Your son is awake, and he's asking for someone named Yolanda. Is she with you?" Richard looked at the woman who'd gone from his employee to his ally, to possibly the person who would save his family. "She's right here," he said. "We're on our way." As they drove back to the hospital with Yolanda's children safe in the back seat, Richard realized that everything he thought he knew about his life had been wrong. His wife was a stranger. His maid was a hero, and his son had been braver than any of them. But as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Richard saw something that made his heart stop. Victoria's white Mercedes was already there, and she wasn't alone. Sometimes children see the danger that blinds adults, and Richard's son had been trying to warn him for months. Marcus looked smaller in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped like mechanical heartbeats, but his eyes were clear when Richard and Yolanda walked into the room. The first thing he did was reach for Yolanda's hand. "Did you bring the files?" he asked her, his voice hoarse but urgent. "They're safe," Yolanda said, squeezing his fingers gently. "Your dad knows everything now." Marcus turned to Richard with eyes that looked older than 17. "Dad, Mom's been planning to kill us for months." The words hung in the sterile air like smoke from a fire that had been burning unseen. Richard sat down in the chair next to the bed, trying to process his son speaking about murder like it was homework or weekend plans. "Tell me what you know," Richard said. It started about 6 months ago. She thought I didn't notice, but she started asking weird questions. About your schedule, about where you kept important papers, about your business meetings. Marcus shifted on the bed, wincing from whatever drugs were still in his system. And she got a new phone. She thought she was being careful, but I saw her using it when she didn't think anyone was watching. The hospital room felt smaller as Marcus continued his story. While Richard had been working 16-hour days building his hotel empire, his 17-year-old son had been playing detective in his own home. I started paying attention to things. The way she acted when certain people called. How she left the room when her phone rang. The meetings she had at the house when you were at work. Marcus looked at Yolanda. I knew you were watching her too. You were smart to trust your instincts, Yolanda said. 2 weeks ago, I heard her on the phone talking about timelines. She said, it has to look accidental. Both of them, same day, so it looks like grief. And then she laughed. Marcus's voice broke slightly. She laughed about killing us, Dad. Richard felt something cold settle in his stomach. The woman he'd shared a bed with for 15 years, who'd given birth to his son, who kissed him goodbye every morning, had been planning their deaths while laughing about it. That's when I decided to find proof. I started going through her things when she wasn't home, looking for the phone, for documents, for anything that would prove what she was planning. The night Marcus found the divorce papers in Victoria's study, he'd also found something else. A detailed timeline of Richard's business trips, his meetings, his routines. And next to each date, notes about opportunities and problems. She's been working with someone, Dad, a man named Jonathan. He comes to the house sometimes when you're not there, and they work on plans together. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Jonathan Mills, the hotel owner who'd been trying to buy into Atlanta's market. The man Richard had refused to do business with because something about him felt wrong. What kind of plans? Making it look like you were depressed about the divorce. Like you couldn't handle losing the family. So you... Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. Murder-suicide, Yolanda said quietly. Make it look like Richard killed himself and took Marcus with him because he couldn't face life without them. The room went silent, except for the steady beep of Marcus's heart monitor. Richard stared at his son, this brave kid who'd been living in a house with a woman planning to murder him, trying to protect his father from dangers Richard had been too blind to see. How did you end up on Memorial Drive tonight? I called Yolanda and told her I had proof. We were supposed to meet at her apartment, but when I got downstairs, Mom's boyfriend was waiting in the garage instead of my bodyguard. Marcus looked at his father. He injected me with something. Said it would be quick and I wouldn't feel anything. Richard's vision went red around the edges. Someone had drugged his son, planned to kill him, probably planned to make it look like an overdose or accident. But I kept the envelope with the divorce papers. I knew if something happened to me, people would ask questions about why I had them. Marcus managed a weak smile. And I texted Yolanda my location before everything got fuzzy. Have you ever had to choose between speaking up and staying safe? How did you find your courage? Yolanda had received Marcus's text and immediately driven to Memorial Drive, finding him stumbling down the street with her nephew Marcus, the boy who'd been walking home from work, trying to help him. The two boys with the same name, thrown together by chance, and probably saving each other's lives. Yolanda called 911 and then called you. Marcus continued. She stayed with me until the ambulance came. Richard looked at Yolanda with new understanding. While he'd been racing through the city, wondering if his son would live or die, she'd been the one making sure he survived. She'd been the parent in the moment when it mattered most. There's more, Marcus said. Mom doesn't know that I copied everything onto a flash drive before I left the house. Bank records, phone logs, emails, photos. Everything. Where is it? I gave it to Yolanda's nephew before I passed out. Told him to hide it somewhere safe. Richard felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. His son had been braver than any adult in this situation, gathering evidence while living with a woman who wanted him dead, making sure the truth would survive even if he didn't. Your mom's downstairs, Richard said. She's been here for an hour, playing the worried wife. Marcus's face went pale. Dad, you can't let her in here alone. She'll find a way to finish what Jonathan started. As if summoned by their conversation, the room door opened and Victoria walked in, perfectly dressed even at 2 in the morning, her face arranged in an expression of motherly concern that Richard now recognized as complete performance. "Oh, thank God you're awake," she said, moving toward Marcus's bed. But Marcus pulled back from her touch like she was poison. "Stay away from me," he said clearly, loud enough for the nurses in the hallway to hear. Victoria's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of cold anger that confirmed everything Richard and Yolanda had discovered. "Sweetheart, you're confused because of the medication." "I'm not confused about anything, Mom. I know what you've been planning." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Victoria looked between Richard and Yolanda, calculating what they knew and what she could still control. "Richard, I need to speak with you privately," she said, her voice tight with barely contained fury. "Anything you want to say, you can say in front of Marcus and Yolanda," Richard replied. Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked completely. "The help doesn't belong in family discussions." "The help," Yolanda said quietly, "saved your son's life tonight while you were planning to take it." As visiting hours ended and security prepared to clear the room, Victoria made one last attempt to control. "Richard, we need to discuss our son's care and the concerning influence certain staff members seem to have over him." But Marcus spoke up with strength that surprised everyone. "Dad, I want Yolanda to stay. She's the only one who's been protecting me." That's when Richard realized his son had been right about everything. The woman who'd cleaned their house had become more of a parent to Marcus than his own mother had. As Victoria left the room, her parting words carried a threat that chilled everyone. "This isn't over, Richard. And you," she looked directly at Yolanda, "should be very careful about overstepping your position." But as the door closed behind Victoria, Marcus reached for both Richard's hand and Yolanda's. "Now what?" he asked. "Now we make sure she can never hurt you again," Richard said. As visiting hours ended, security alerted Richard that Victoria was in the parking garage, and she wasn't alone. Victoria had played chess while everyone else played checkers, until she realized her husband's maid might be a grandmaster. The parking garage felt like a concrete tomb, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Richard and Yolanda stepped out of the elevator to find Victoria standing next to her white Mercedes, but she wasn't alone. Two men in expensive suits flanked her, the kind of men who solved problems that couldn't be handled in boardrooms. "Hello, Richard," Victoria said, her voice sweet as poison honey. "We need to have a conversation." "About what?" "About your new friendship with the help." Victoria's eyes moved to Yolanda like a snake sizing up prey, and about how certain people need to remember their place in this family. One of the men stepped forward, and Richard recognized him from the photos Yolanda had shown him. Jonathan Mills, his wife's lover and business partner in murder. Up close, he looked like every other hotel executive Richard had ever met. Sharp suit, expensive watch, dead eyes that calculated profit from other people's pain. "Mr. Lawson," Jonathan said, "I think there's been some misunderstanding about your wife's activities. Perhaps we can clear things up. The only thing I need cleared up is why you drugged my son tonight." Jonathan's smile never reached his eyes. That was unfortunate. Marcus wasn't supposed to be involved, but sometimes children get curious about things that don't concern them. Yolanda stepped closer to Richard, her body tense with the kind of alertness that came from growing up in neighborhoods where danger wore expensive clothes. "You threatened my children," she said to Victoria. "I did nothing of the sort. I simply pointed out that accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than screaming, especially to their children. Richard felt something snap inside his chest. This woman, the mother of his child, the person he'd trusted with his life for 15 years, was threatening kids to protect her plan to commit murder. "You're done, Victoria. Both of you are done." "Actually, we're just getting started," Jonathan said, pulling out his phone. "You see, we have security footage of your son's accident tonight. Very tragic. Rich boy overdoses on drugs, dies in the hospital despite his father's best efforts. The grieving billionaire, overcome with guilt and loss." The threat hung in the air like smoke. They were going to kill Marcus in the hospital and make it look like Richard couldn't handle the grief. But Yolanda surprised everyone by laughing. "You really think we're that stupid?" she asked. "You think we came here without backup?" Richard looked at her, confused, but Yolanda's eyes told him to play along. "The police already have copies of everything," Richard said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "Bullshit, Victoria snapped. If you had real evidence, I'd already be in jail. Would you?" Yolanda pulled out her phone and held up the screen. "Because Detective Williams is very interested in your offshore accounts. And the FBI has some questions about money laundering through hotel purchases." Jonathan's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Yolanda smiled, and for the first time Richard saw the steel core that had kept her family alive in a world that didn't care about people like them. "See, the thing about being invisible is that people forget you have eyes and ears. And brains." The second man, who'd been silent until now, reached inside his jacket. But before he could draw whatever weapon he was carrying, the parking garage filled with the sound of sirens. Police cars surrounded them, red and blue lights painting the concrete walls like a disco from hell. Detective Williams stepped out of the first car, his hand resting on his gun. "Jonathan Mills, Victoria Lawson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and money laundering. When someone threatens your children, how far would you go to protect them? What's your breaking point?" As the police cuffed Victoria and Jonathan, Richard realized that Yolanda had been 3 steps ahead of everyone. She called the police before they'd even left the hospital room, given them the evidence Marcus had collected, and set up Victoria's arrest while appearing to walk into a trap. "How did you know they'd be here?" he asked her. "Because people like Victoria always have to have the last word." She couldn't just walk away. She had to try to control the situation one more time. Yolanda watched as Victoria was pushed into the back of a police car. "And people like her always underestimate people like me." Victoria's final words before the car door slammed shut carried across the parking garage. "You think this is over? I own half the judges in the city. I'll be out by morning, and when I am, your little cleaning lady is going to disappear." But as the police cars pulled away, carrying Victoria and Jonathan toward a jail cell, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Standing in the fluorescent-lit garage, watching his wife of 15 years being arrested for trying to kill him and his son, Richard turned to Yolanda with new eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This is just the beginning." The perfect frame-up. Stolen money, planted evidence, and a maid with everything to lose. Except Richard finally chose to fight for someone besides himself. 2 weeks later, Richard's world exploded again, but this time the bomb was wrapped in legal papers and delivered by his own lawyers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson," his attorney said, sliding a folder across the mahogany conference table. "Victoria posted bail yesterday, and her first move was to file charges against Yolanda Rodriguez for embezzlement." Richard stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "Embezzlement. $300,000, allegedly stolen from your personal accounts over the past year. She has bank records, transfer receipts, even security footage of Yolanda accessing your office safe." The conference room felt like it was shrinking around him. Victoria was in jail awaiting trial for attempted murder, but somehow she was still pulling strings, still finding ways to destroy the people who'd exposed her. "It's impossible. Yolanda doesn't even know the combination to my safe. According to this evidence, she's been skimming money and transferring it to accounts under her children's names. The DA is treating it as a separate case from the murder charges." Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Williams. "Yolanda arrested an hour ago. Bail set at $50,000. She needs a lawyer." The courthouse looked like every other government building, designed to intimidate people who couldn't afford lawyers and make them feel small before they ever spoke to a judge. Richard found Yolanda in the holding area, still wearing the jeans and sweater she'd had on when the police came to her apartment. She looked smaller behind the metal bars, but there was fire in her eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. "They came at 6 in the morning, she said without preamble. "Scared my kids, tore apart my apartment, found bank accounts I've never seen before with my name on them. Victoria set you up." "Of course she did. Question is, are you going to believe her lies or fight for the truth?" Richard looked at this woman who'd saved his son's life, exposed his wife's murder plot, and put her own family at risk to protect his. The answer should have been simple, but he could see doubt creeping into Yolanda's eyes. Why would you even ask me that? Because I'm a maid from East Atlanta and you're a billionaire from Buckhead. When rich people need someone to blame, they pick people like me. Yolanda gripped the bars between them. And because your lawyers are already telling you to distance yourself from me, aren't they? They were. Every attorney Richard employed had advised him to stay away from Yolanda, to let her legal troubles play out separately, to protect his own interests first. But as Richard looked at Yolanda, really looked at her, he realized something had changed in the past 2 weeks. She wasn't just his employee anymore, or even just his ally in the fight against Victoria. She'd become someone he couldn't imagine losing. Have you ever been falsely accused? How did it feel to have someone believe in you when everyone else had already made up their minds? I'm not going anywhere, Richard said. The courtroom smelled like old wood and older lies when Yolanda's bail hearing began the next morning. Richard sat in the front row, watching the woman who'd saved his family being treated like a criminal by people who'd never bothered to learn her story. The prosecutor painted a picture of calculated theft. A trusted employee who'd slowly stolen from her wealthy employer, using her access to his home and his trust to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford on a maid's salary. The defendant had complete access to Mr. Lawson's home, including his office where he kept important financial documents, the prosecutor said. Bank records show systematic transfers from his accounts to accounts bearing her children's names. Richard watched Yolanda, sitting at the defendant's table in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, her court-appointed lawyer shuffling papers like he'd already given up on her case. But then Richard's private investigator stood up in the gallery and held up a tablet. Your Honor, we have security footage that changes everything. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Victoria entering Richard's office 3 months ago, opening his safe and photographing the contents. Other clips showed her planting documents in Yolanda's locker at the hotel where she'd been working part-time. This evidence proves that Mrs. Victoria Lawson had access to her husband's financial information and used it to frame Ms. Rodriguez, Richard's lawyer announced. The prosecutor objected, argued that the footage was inadmissible, claimed it had been doctored. But the judge had seen enough corruption cases to recognize a frame-up when he saw one. Charges dismissed, he said, banging his gavel. Freedom tasted like Atlanta air after rain, clean, electric with possibility. Standing on the courthouse steps, Yolanda felt the weight of false accusations lift from her shoulders like chains finally broken. Richard was waiting for her at the bottom of the steps, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she let herself really look at him. Not as her employer, not as Marcus's father, but as the man who'd chosen to believe in her when believing was dangerous. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Thank my investigator. And thank yourself for being smart enough to document everything Victoria did. They walked toward his car in silence, both aware that something had shifted between them during the past hour. The space between employer and employee had collapsed completely, replaced by something neither of them had expected. As they reached the Mercedes, Yolanda stopped walking. What happens now, she asked. Now we make sure Victoria can never hurt anyone again. And after that, Richard looked at her, this woman who'd been invisible in his house for 3 years, who'd risked everything to save his son, who'd been willing to go to prison to protect his family, and realized he didn't want to go back to a world where she was invisible. After that, we figure out what comes next. The kiss happened without planning, desperate and grateful and tinged with the adrenaline of survival. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, tasting victory and want in equal measure. For a moment, standing on the courthouse steps with lawyers and reporters and strangers walking past them, they forgot about everything except the electricity crackling between them. When they broke apart, breathless and surprised by their own boldness, Richard's phone rang with a call that would change everything again. Victoria's lawyer, with an offer that made Richard's blood run cold. She'll disappear forever and give up all claims to your fortune, if you give her Yolanda. The truth lived in pixels and timestamps, and it painted Victoria as the master manipulator while revealing Yolanda as the unlikely hero. 3 days after Yolanda's charges were dropped, Richard's private investigator walked into his office carrying a tablet that would change everything. The security footage they'd used in court was just the beginning. The real evidence was hidden in deleted files, encrypted messages, and digital breadcrumbs that Victoria thought she'd erased. "She's been planning this for 2 years," the investigator said, pulling up bank records on the screen. "Look at these transfers. Small amounts at first, taken from your business accounts and moved to offshore holdings. But she wasn't stealing from you. She was stealing from your hotel's revenue." Richard stared at the numbers, watching 2 years of systematic theft unfold in spreadsheets and transaction logs. Victoria hadn't just been planning to kill him and Marcus. She'd been bleeding his business dry to fund her new life with Jonathan. How much? $8 million so far. Maybe more. She's been skimming from your hotels in Miami, New York, and Chicago, moving money through shell companies that Jonathan set up. The investigator swiped to another screen. "And she's been sabotaging your new deals, making sure you lose contracts so she and Jonathan could swoop in with competing offers." The scope of Victoria's betrayal was staggering. While Richard had been working 18-hour days to build his empire, his wife had been systematically destroying it from the inside. "There's more," the investigator continued. "We found the original plan. They were going to wait until after your tragic death to merge your hotel chain with Jonathan's company. Victoria would have been the grieving widow who inherited everything. And within a year, she'd have sold the whole thing to her boyfriend at below market value." Richard felt sick. His death, his son's death, had been just the opening move in a business acquisition. "Where's Yolanda now?" he asked. "Picking up her kids from school. She's been staying at her sister's place since the arrest, trying to keep them safe." Richard made a decision that went against every business instinct he'd developed over 20 years. He was going to tell Yolanda everything, not just about Victoria's crimes, but about the feelings that had been building between them since that night in the hospital parking garage. He found her at Carmen Elementary, standing outside the school with other parents waiting for dismissal. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked like every other working mom juggling responsibilities and worry. But when she saw him walking toward her, her face lit up with a smile that hit him somewhere behind his ribs. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I have news about Victoria. Good news. And I wanted to tell you in person." They sat in his car while her kids played on the school playground, and Richard explained everything his investigator had found. With each new piece of evidence, Yolanda's eyes grew wider. "She really was going to destroy everything you built," she said finally. "She already had. I just didn't know it yet." Richard watched Yolanda's daughter push her younger brother on the swing set, their laughter carrying through the car windows. "But we stopped her. You stopped her. I just cleaned your house and happened to be in the right place at the right time." "That's not true, and you know it." Richard turned in his seat to face her fully. "You saved Marcus. You saved me. You put your own family at risk to expose someone who would have killed us all." Something shifted in the air between them. The same electricity that had sparked on the courthouse steps, but stronger now, more intentional. "Richard," she started, "I know this is complicated. I know there's a million reasons why this doesn't make sense. But I can't stop thinking about you. What's more powerful, being rescued by someone or fighting alongside them as equals? Share your thoughts below." The kiss was different this time. Not desperate like before, but slow and searching, like they were both trying to figure out what they were building together. When they broke apart, Yolanda's cheeks were flushed and her breathing had changed. "This is crazy," she whispered. "The craziest thing I've ever done," Richard agreed. "And I don't care." He reached across the car to touch her face, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. "I want to know everything about you. Not just the brave woman who saved my family, but the person who reads all those books in her apartment and raises kids who believe they can do anything. And I want to know the man who chose to believe in me when everyone else told him not to." They were interrupted by Yolanda's daughter knocking on the car window, school bag in hand and curiosity written all over her 10-year-old face. "Mom, who's your friend?" As they drove back to Yolanda's sister's house, Richard realized that everything about his life was about to change. Not just because Victoria was going to prison, not just because his business was safe, but because the woman sitting next to him had become someone he couldn't imagine living without. But when they pulled into the driveway, Victoria's lawyer was waiting for them with an offer that would test everything they'd built together. "Mr. Lawson," the lawyer said, stepping out of a black sedan, "my client has a proposition for you. She'll plead guilty to all charges and disappear forever. No claims on your assets, no custody fight for Marcus, no appeals or legal complications." In exchange for what? The lawyer's smile was cold as winter. "You give her Yolanda Rodriguez. 1 hour alone, no witnesses, no police. After that, my client disappears and you never see her again." Richard felt Yolanda's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his like she was anchoring herself against a storm. "She wants to hurt me because I exposed her," Yolanda said quietly. "She wants to kill you," Richard replied, "because you're the only witness who can testify about her planning Marcus's murder." The lawyer checked his watch. "You have 24 hours to decide. After that, Mrs. Lawson withdraws her offer and fights every charge in court. Could take years to resolve. Expensive years." As the lawyer drove away, leaving them standing in the driveway with an impossible choice, Richard pulled Yolanda closer. "There has to be another way," she said. "There is. We fight her. Together." But even as he said it, Richard could see the fear in Yolanda's eyes. Not fear for herself, but for her children, for Marcus, for everyone Victoria could hurt while fighting from prison. They had 24 hours to decide between Yolanda's life and Victoria's freedom. And Richard already knew what his answer would be. Victoria's final gambit wasn't about money or revenge. It was about proving that even transformed men have a price. Richard's penthouse felt like a war room at midnight, papers scattered across the marble dining table like battle plans. Marcus was asleep in his bedroom, finally safe enough to rest without nightmares about his mother. But Richard couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except Victoria's ultimatum. Yolanda sat across from him, her laptop open to bank records and legal documents, trying to find another way out of the trap Victoria had set. But every option they explored led back to the same conclusion. Victoria held all the cards, and she knew it. "What if I just do it?" Yolanda said suddenly. Richard looked up from the contract he'd been staring at without reading. "Do what?" "Meet with her. 1 hour like she wants. Maybe I can record the conversation, get her to confess to something that would put her away forever." "Absolutely not. Richard, she's going to keep hurting people until someone stops her. If it takes me walking into a room with her to end this, then that's what I'll do." Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped against the marble floor. "She wants to kill you, Yolanda. This isn't some negotiation or business meeting. She wants you dead, and she's offering to disappear afterward because she knows you'll be too dead to testify against her. And if I don't do it, she'll spend the next 5 years fighting every charge, appealing every conviction, making our lives hell while she's doing it." Yolanda closed her laptop and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much but still held hope. "My kids can't live like that. Marcus can't live like that. Always looking over their shoulders, always wondering when she's going to strike next." The city lights beyond the penthouse windows stretched out like stars fallen to earth, beautiful and distant and cold. Richard had spent his whole adult life in rooms like this, making decisions that affected thousands of people and millions of dollars. But he'd never felt more powerless than he did right now. There has to be another way. What if there isn't? Yolanda stood up and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass like she was trying to touch the world beyond. What if this is the choice? My life for everyone else's safety. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. Yolanda turned around, and Richard saw something in her face that took his breath away. Not fear or resignation, but determination. The same strength that had kept her family together through poverty and heartbreak, that had made her risk everything to save Marcus, that had turned a maid into a warrior. "Then don't let me," she said. "Fight for us instead." Have you ever loved someone enough to walk away, to protect them? Or fought to stay when leaving seemed easier? The space between them disappeared as Richard crossed the room, his hands framing her face like he was trying to memorize every detail, before she vanished. "I can't lose you," he said. "Not now. Not when I'm finally understanding what this is." "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything I never knew I wanted." The kiss was desperate, full of fear and need, and the terrible knowledge that they might be running out of time. But when Yolanda's hands slid up his chest and tangled in his hair, Richard felt something shift between them. This wasn't just about attraction anymore, or gratitude, or the adrenaline of surviving danger together. This was about two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and discovered they didn't want to face the world alone anymore. "Show me," she said against his mouth. "Show me what you want." Richard's control, the careful discipline that had built his empire and managed his life for 20 years, cracked completely. He lifted her onto the dining table, scattering legal documents onto the floor, his mouth finding the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "I want you," he breathed against her skin. "All of you. Not just tonight, not just until Victoria is gone, but after this is over. I want to build something with you." Yolanda's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt, her touch leaving trails of fire wherever she touched him. "I want that too. But first we have to survive this." They made love with the urgency of people who knew tomorrow wasn't promised, every touch carrying the weight of words they couldn't say yet. Richard worshipped her body like he was trying to memorize every curve, every sound she made, every way she responded to him. "I love you," he said when they were both breathless and tangled together on his couch, the city lights painting patterns on their skin. "I love you too," she replied, and it should have been the perfect ending to a perfect night. But Richard's phone rang at 3 a.m. with news that changed everything. Victoria escaped from county lockup 2 hours ago, Detective Williams said. "We don't know how, but she's gone." "And Mr. Lawson?" "She left a message. She's coming for Yolanda tonight." Richard looked at the woman sleeping in his arms, her face peaceful for the first time since this nightmare began, and made a decision that would either save them all or destroy everything he'd ever cared about. He was going to end this war with Victoria once and for all. But first, he had to get Yolanda and the kids somewhere she could never find them. As Yolanda woke to the sound of him making phone calls in the kitchen, coordinating safe houses and security teams, she realized that the choice Victoria had offered them was no longer on the table. Now they had to fight for their lives, playing double agent in designer kitchens and marble hallways. But this time, the hunter was about to become the hunted. Victoria's escape from county lockup made national news by morning. The story was simple. A clerical error had released her on a technicality, and by the time anyone realized the mistake, she'd vanished into Atlanta's sprawling urban maze. But Richard knew better. Victoria didn't make mistakes. She made opportunities. "She planned this," Richard said, pacing his hotel office while Yolanda and the kids stayed in a safe house across town. "The escape, the timing, all of it. She's been pulling strings from inside that jail cell." Detective Williams nodded grimly. "We found 3 guards who suddenly came into money this week. And the surveillance cameras in her cell block mysteriously malfunctioned for exactly 47 minutes. Long enough for her to walk out. Long enough for her to disappear completely." Richard's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I have something that belongs to you. Meet me at the penthouse in 1 hour, or I start returning pieces." The message included a photo that made Richard's blood freeze. Marcus's school ID, torn in half. "She has my son," Richard said, showing the phone to Detective Williams. "Marcus is at the safe house with Yolanda and her kids." Richard called the safe house immediately. The phone rang 6 times before Yolanda answered, her voice tight with fear. "Richard? Thank God. Victoria was here. She took Marcus." The world tilted sideways. Richard had moved everyone to the safe house specifically to protect them from Victoria, but somehow she'd found them anyway. Ow! She knew things about the house that she shouldn't have known. Which bedroom Marcus was in, where we kept the security keypad, even which car we'd been driving. Yolanda's voice broke. "She's been watching us for days." Richard felt the same helpless rage that had consumed him in the hospital parking garage, but multiplied by 1,000. Victoria had his son, had threatened the woman he loved, and was playing games with their lives like they were pieces on a chessboard. Where are you now? In the car with my kids, driving back to your place. She said to bring me to the penthouse in 30 minutes, or Marcus starts paying for your mistakes. What would you risk to expose someone who thought they were untouchable? Tell me about your bravest moment. Against every instinct screaming at him to keep Yolanda away from Victoria, Richard realized they had no choice. Victoria held all the cards: Marcus's life, the element of surprise, and 15 years of knowing exactly how to hurt Richard where it would destroy him. But this time, they weren't walking into Victoria's trap blind. We're going to end this, Richard said. But we're doing it together. The penthouse felt different when Richard and Yolanda walked through the front door, like stepping into a tomb that used to be a home. Victoria had been busy during her brief freedom, rearranging furniture and leaving subtle signs that she'd been living there since her escape. Hello, darling. Victoria's voice came from the kitchen, sweet and poisonous as always. Right on time. They found her sitting at the marble breakfast bar, perfectly dressed even though she'd been on the run for 12 hours, sipping coffee from Richard's favorite mug like nothing had changed. Marcus was zip-tied to a chair beside her, conscious but clearly drugged. When he saw Richard and Yolanda, his eyes filled with relief and fear in equal measure. Let him go, Victoria, Richard said. This is between us. Actually, it's between me and her. Victoria's gaze moved to Yolanda like a predator studying prey. She's the one who destroyed my life. She's the one who turned my husband against me, poisoned my son's mind, and sent me to prison. I told the truth, Yolanda said quietly. Everything I said about you is true. Truth is subjective, sweetheart. And my truth is that you've taken everything that belonged to me. Victoria stood up, her movements graceful and deadly. My husband, my home, my future. So now I'm going to take everything that belongs to you. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Victoria wasn't just talking about killing Yolanda. She was talking about destroying her family, her children, everyone she loved. Your kids are safe for now, Victoria continued, reading the fear in Yolanda's eyes. I have people watching them, but they won't be hurt as long as you cooperate. What do you want? I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything. Victoria pulled a small device from her purse, some kind of remote control. This building has been wired with enough explosives to bring it down completely. My finger comes off this button, and everyone in a 6-block radius dies with us. Richard's mind raced through the possibilities. The penthouse was on the 40th floor of a building that housed offices, restaurants, and residential units. Hundreds of innocent people would die if Victoria followed through on her threat. You're insane. I'm federal. Victoria smiled, and it was the coldest expression Richard had ever seen on a human face. See, I realized that killing you and Marcus cleanly was too easy, too quick. I wanted you to suffer the way you made me suffer. Yolanda stepped forward, her hands raised in surrender. Let them go. Richard, Marcus, all the innocent people in this building. This is about me, so let's finish it. Oh, we will. But first, I want Richard to watch what happens when someone takes away the thing he loves most. Victoria raised her other hand, revealing a syringe filled with clear liquid. Same thing I gave Marcus earlier. It won't kill you immediately. That would be too kind. Instead, you'll have about 10 minutes to say goodbye while your heart slowly stops beating. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and Marcus's ragged breathing. Richard looked at Yolanda, at his son, at the woman who destroyed their family while pretending to love them, and realized that Victoria had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated them again. There's just one problem with your plan, Yolanda said. And what's that? Yolanda smiled, and Richard saw the steel core that had kept her family alive in a world that didn't care about people like them. You assumed we came here alone. The penthouse windows exploded inward as SWAT teams rappelled down from the roof, assault rifles trained on Victoria before she could move. Detective Williams burst through the front door with a team of officers, and suddenly the marble floors Richard had walked across for 15 years were filled with tactical gear and shouted commands. Victoria's finger tightened on the remote, but before she could release it, Marcus, who'd been quietly working at his restraints while she'd been focused on Yolanda, kicked the device out of her hand. It skittered across the marble floor and shattered against the wall. As police tackled Victoria and secured the explosive she'd threatened them with, Richard pulled Yolanda and Marcus into his arms, holding them both like he was afraid they might disappear. "How did you know?" Marcus asked. "Because your mom taught me something important," Yolanda said, looking at Victoria being loaded into a police car. "People like her always have to have the last word. They can't just walk away. They have to try to control the situation one more time." But even as Victoria was driven away in handcuffs, her final words carried across the penthouse like a curse. "This isn't over. Even from prison, I can reach everyone you love." Richard held Yolanda tighter, knowing that while they'd won this battle, the war with Victoria might never truly end. Victoria's threat from the police car wasn't empty words. It was a promise that would test every alliance Richard and Yolanda had built. 2 days after Victoria's arrest, Richard's security team found the first message. Carved into the hood of his Mercedes with surgical precision were 4 words that made his blood run cold. "Your son is next." The second message arrived while Marcus was at physical therapy, recovering from the drugs Victoria's boyfriend had injected him with. A photo slid under the treatment room door. Marcus walking into the building, taken with a long lens from someone who'd been watching for hours. "She's got people on the outside," Detective Williams said, studying the surveillance footage from the hospital parking lot. "Professional people. This isn't some prison gang favor. She's paying for real talent." Richard paced his hotel office while Yolanda sat in the corner, her laptop open to security feeds from her sister's house where her kids were staying. Every shadow that moved across the screen made her shoulders tense. How is she coordinating all this from maximum security? Richard demanded. "Money talks, even in prison. She's got lawyers, she's got connections, and she's got nothing left to lose." Williams pulled out a folder thick with surveillance photos. "We've identified 3 different teams watching your movements. One following Marcus, one watching Yolanda's family, and one that seems focused on you." The photos were professionally taken. Richard leaving his office, Yolanda picking up groceries, Marcus getting into a car with his bodyguard. Someone had been documenting their every move for days. "There's more," Williams continued. "Victoria's been making calls to offshore accounts, moving money, hiring people, setting up something big." "What kind of something?" "The kind that ends with all of you dead and her walking away clean." Yolanda closed her laptop and looked at Richard with eyes that had lost none of their fire despite the constant fear. "We can't live like this, always looking over our shoulders, always wondering when she's going to strike next." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop running and start hunting." Have you ever reached a point where you had to stop being afraid and start fighting back? What pushed you over that line? The plan they developed over the next 6 hours was dangerous, probably illegal, and definitely the only way to end Victoria's reach once and for all. If she was using her connections and money to hunt them from prison, they needed to cut off her resources at the source. "The offshore accounts," Yolanda said, pulling up bank records on Richard's computer. "She's been moving money for 2 years, building war chests in banks that don't ask questions. If we can freeze those accounts, we cut off her ability to pay for help." "How do we prove the money is connected to her crimes?" "We don't prove it. We steal it." Richard stared at her. The woman who'd been cleaning his house 6 months ago was suggesting they commit international bank fraud to stop his murderous wife. That's a federal crime. So is attempted murder. So is hiring hitmen. So is threatening children. Yolanda pulled up another screen showing wire transfers from Victoria's accounts to individuals with criminal records. "She's playing by different rules, Richard. Maybe we should too." The decision went against everything Richard had built his business reputation on. He'd spent 20 years being the honest player in a corrupt industry, the hotel owner who followed regulations and paid fair wages and never cut corners that hurt people. But Victoria wasn't people. She was a monster wearing his wife's face, and she was trying to destroy everyone he loved. "What do you need from me?" Yolanda's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Access to your business computers, and about 6 hours to work some magic you can claim you never saw." Working with Yolanda in his private office after midnight felt like the most natural thing in the world. She moved through his computer systems with the confidence of someone who'd been watching and learning for years, her fingers flying across keyboards as she traced financial trails that Victoria thought she'd hidden. "Here," she said, pointing to a series of transactions. She's been paying a company called Blackstone Security $5,000 a week for the past month. What's Blackstone Security? The kind of people who make problems disappear permanently. Richard watched Yolanda work, marveling at how someone he'd completely underestimated had become the most dangerous person in the room. Not dangerous to him, but dangerous to anyone who threatened the people she cared about. "How did you learn to do this?" "Community college computer classes before my first kid was born. And 3 years of watching you handle business calls while I cleaned your office." She looked at him with a grin that was pure mischief. Rich people always assume the help is deaf and stupid. "I never thought you were stupid." "No, but you never thought I was smart either. There's a difference." As dawn broke over Atlanta, Yolanda had successfully traced and frozen 17 offshore accounts containing over $12 million of Victoria's stolen money. More importantly, she'd identified every person Victoria had been paying for surveillance, intimidation, and worse. "Blackstone Security just got a very interesting call from their primary client," Yolanda said, hanging up Richard's office phone. "Apparently, Victoria Lawson has decided she no longer requires their services." "You impersonated her?" "I've been listening to her voice for 3 years. And it's amazing how cooperative people become when their paychecks stop coming." Richard pulled Yolanda into his arms, kissing her with the desperate relief of someone who'd been holding his breath for days. She tasted like coffee and victory, and for the first time since Victoria's escape, he felt like they might actually survive this. But as they broke apart, Richard's phone rang with a call that changed everything again. "This is Warden Johnson at Georgia State Maximum Security. I'm calling to inform you that Victoria Lawson was found dead in her cell an hour ago." The silence stretched between them like a bridge they were afraid to cross. "Ow," Richard asked. "Apparent suicide." "But Mr. Lawson?" "There's something else. She left a letter, and it's addressed to both you and Ms. Rodriguez." Death hadn't stopped Victoria's final game. It had just changed the rules to something more twisted than murder. The letter was written in Victoria's perfect handwriting, each word crafted like a blade designed to cut deep. Richard and Yolanda read it together in the warden's office, surrounded by concrete walls and fluorescent lights that made everything feel like a morgue. "My dearest Richard and his cleaning lady, if you're reading this, then you've won. Congratulations. You've destroyed my life, taken my freedom, and turned my own son against me. I hope it was worth it. But victory has a price, and I've made sure you'll pay it for the rest of your lives. The accounts you froze this morning, they were never the real money. The people you thought you stopped, they were never the real threat. While you were playing detective, I was playing chess." "Richard, do you remember the fire at your Miami hotel 3 years ago? The one that killed 2 construction workers? That wasn't an accident. That was me testing how far I could push before you noticed." "Yolanda, do you remember your nephew Marcus, the boy who helped save my son? He's not safe just because you think you've won. Some gifts keep giving. I've left behind insurance policies that will activate if anything happens to me. Think of it as my legacy. Every person you care about, every place you go, every moment you think you're safe. You'll be wondering if this is the day my insurance pays out. Sleep well, darlings. I'll be watching from wherever monsters go when they die. With all my love and hatred, Victoria. P.S. Check the basement of your precious penthouse. I left you a wedding present." The drive back to the penthouse felt like traveling through a nightmare. Richard's hands gripped the steering wheel while Yolanda sat beside him, both of them trying to process what Victoria's final letter meant. "She couldn't have rigged the whole building," Richard said. "We had it swept for explosives yesterday. Victoria was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. What if she planted something before we even knew we were fighting?" The basement of Richard's building was a place he'd visited maybe twice in 15 years, a maze of storage units and mechanical equipment that hummed with the building's life support systems. The elevator down felt like descending into Victoria's tomb. Storage Unit B, 47 was registered under a name Richard didn't recognize, but the key Victoria had left with the warden opened it easily. Inside, they found Victoria's real insurance policy. Files. Thousands of them. Photos, documents, recordings, bank records, and evidence of crimes that went back decades. Not just Victoria's crimes, but other people's. Politicians, judges, business owners, police officials, anyone Victoria had ever done business with, blackmailed, or simply observed from her position as a wealthy woman with too much time and not enough conscience. This is what she meant by insurance, Yolanda said, picking up a folder labeled Judge Morrison Bribery Evidence. She's been collecting dirt on people for years, probably decades. There were photos of judges taking money, recordings of politicians making illegal deals, evidence of police corruption, and business documents that prove fraud in companies across 3 states. Victoria had turned information gathering into an art form. "Look at this," Richard said, holding up a file with his own name on it. Inside were photos of him with business associates, records of deals he'd made, and documents about the Miami hotel fire that Victoria claimed she'd caused. She was building cases against everyone she met, including you. But the most chilling discovery was a manila envelope marked Final Instructions. Inside were contracts with various individuals, some in prison, some on the streets, some in positions of power, all paid to carry out specific tasks if Victoria died unexpectedly. The contracts were dated, specific, and terrifying in their detail. Someone was supposed to burn down Yolanda's sister's house. Someone else was contracted to sabotage Richard's hotels in New York. A third person had instructions to kidnap Marcus and make it look like a random crime. All of it scheduled to begin exactly 72 hours after Victoria's death. "We have less than 2 days, Yolanda said, checking her watch. "When you discover that someone's hatred for you will outlive them, how do you fight a ghost?" Share your thoughts below. The next 18 hours became a blur of phone calls, police reports, and desperate attempts to warn everyone on Victoria's hit list. Richard used every connection he'd built in 20 years of business to reach judges, politicians, and officials who might be targets. Yolanda coordinated with Detective Williams to identify and arrest the people Victoria had contracted for her posthumous revenge. But Victoria had been thorough. Some of the people she'd hired were already dead, killed to prevent them from talking. Others had disappeared entirely, taking their contracts with them into hiding. And some of Victoria's targets were refusing to believe they were in danger. "Judge Morrison thinks this is all a hoax," Detective Williams reported after spending 6 hours trying to convince the man to accept police protection. "He says dead people can't hurt him. What about the others? We've arrested 4 of the contract killers, but 3 more are still out there. And the arsonist Victoria hired for your sister-in-law's house? He's been missing for 2 days." Richard found himself in the strange position of trying to save people who might not want to be saved, including some who'd probably committed the crimes Victoria had evidence of. But letting innocent families get hurt because their fathers or husbands were corrupt wasn't an option. "There's something else," Williams continued. Victoria's lawyer came forward with more documents. Apparently, she's been planning this posthumous revenge for over a year. There are backup plans and backup plans for the backup plans. How many people are we talking about? Dozens. Maybe more. She turned destroying lives into a science project. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Richard realized they'd never be able to stop all of Victoria's final plans. There were too many people involved, too many moving parts, too many ways for hatred to reach across death and destroy the living. But they could protect the people who mattered most. "We need to disappear," Yolanda said as they sat in Richard's hotel office, surrounded by evidence of Victoria's crimes and plans for revenge. "Take the kids, take Marcus, and go somewhere she couldn't have predicted. Run away, survive. There's a difference." Looking at Yolanda across the desk they'd been working at for 18 straight hours, Richard realized she was right. They could spend the rest of their lives chasing Victoria's ghosts, or they could choose to build something new somewhere she couldn't reach. But as they prepared to leave Atlanta behind, Richard's phone rang with news that changed everything one final time. "Mr. Lawson? This is Agent Sarachon with the FBI. We need to talk about Victoria's files. And we need to talk about a deal." The FBI wanted Victoria's files, and they were willing to trade protection for evidence. But some deals come with prices that test how far love can stretch. Agent Shin looked like every other federal agent Richard had ever met. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of smile that promised nothing while asking for everything. She sat across from Richard and Yolanda in the hotel conference room, a briefcase full of legal documents beside her chair. Victoria Lawson collected evidence of corruption that goes to the highest levels of state and local government, Agent Shin said without preamble. Judges taking bribes, politicians laundering money, police officials covering up crimes. The files you found represent the biggest political scandal in Georgia's history. Richard leaned back in his chair. And you want us to hand them over. I want you to help us clean up a system that's been broken for decades. The evidence Victoria gathered, twisted as her motives were, can put away criminals who've been hiding behind badges and robes for years. Yolanda studied Agent Shun with the same wariness she'd shown Victoria the first time they'd met. What's in it for us? Full federal protection. New identities if you want them. Relocation anywhere in the country. And immunity from any crimes you might have committed while gathering this evidence. The offer was tempting. Richard could sell his hotels, take the money, and start over somewhere Victoria's poison couldn't reach. But something about Agent Chin's presentation felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script designed to get the answer she wanted. What aren't you telling us? Richard asked. Agent Chin's professional smile flickered for just a moment. Some of the evidence Victoria collected implicates people in federal law enforcement. This investigation could take years, and during that time, you need to testify in multiple trials. Your faces would be in newspapers, on television, in court records. We'd be targets forever, Yolanda said. You'd be heroes, the people who brought down the most corrupt network in the Southeast. Dead heroes. Have you ever had to choose between doing the right thing and protecting your family? How do you weigh justice against safety? The silence stretched between them, while Richard considered options that all seemed designed to hurt someone he loved. Give the FBI the evidence, and spend years testifying in trials that would paint targets on their backs. Keep the evidence and try to disappear, and live forever knowing that corrupt officials were still destroying other people's lives. I need time to think, Richard said. I'm afraid time is something we don't have much of, Agent Chin replied. Victoria's contracts are still active. We've arrested some of the people she hired, but others are still out there. And some of the officials on her target list have decided that eliminating the evidence is easier than facing trial. Richard's phone buzzed with a text that made his stomach drop. Judge Morrison found dead in his chambers an hour ago. Suicide, note confesses to taking bribes. Detective Williams. Agent Chin saw Richard's face change. That's the third official who's died since Victoria's files surfaced. They're cleaning house, Mr. Lawson, eliminating anyone who might testify against them. And if we don't cooperate, then you become part of the house that needs cleaning. Richard looked at Yolanda and saw the same calculation in her eyes that he was making. Stay and fight a system that was willing to kill judges to protect itself, or run away and let corruption win. There's another option, Yolanda said quietly. We give you the files, but we don't testify. You use the evidence to build cases, but you leave us out of it. That might not hold up in court without witness testimony. Then you better have good investigators. Agent Chun considered this for a long moment. There could be immunity issues. If any of Victoria's evidence suggests you knew about crimes and didn't report them. I cleaned his house, Yolanda interrupted. I didn't analyze his business deals or investigate his wife's criminal activities. I emptied trash cans and folded laundry. And you, Mr. Lawson? Richard thought about the past 6 months, the lies, the attempted murder, the way Victoria had systematically destroyed his trust in everyone around him. I was married to someone I didn't know at all. Everything I thought I knew about my life was wrong. Agent Chin nodded slowly. We might be able to work with that. As they negotiated the terms of their cooperation, Richard realized that fighting Victoria wasn't over just because she was dead. Her corruption had infected so many people, created so many secrets, that cleaning it up would take years. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt like they might actually survive it. The deal they worked out was simple. Richard and Yolanda would turn over all of Victoria's files to the FBI. In exchange, they'd receive federal protection while the investigation was ongoing, but they wouldn't be required to testify unless the evidence was insufficient for conviction without their witness statements. Essentially, you're giving us the ammunition, but not the gun, Agent Chin said. We're giving you justice and keeping our lives, Yolanda replied. As they prepared to hand over boxes of evidence that would reshape Georgia politics, Richard's phone rang with a call that reminded him how complicated their new life was about to become. Dad, Marcus's voice was tight with worry. There are people watching Aunt Carmen's house, and they don't look like cops. Richard looked at Agent Chun, who was already reaching for her radio to call for backup. Victoria's network of corrupt officials and hired criminals wasn't going to wait for the FBI to build cases. They were going to eliminate the evidence and the witnesses before justice had a chance to work. The war with Victoria might be over, but the battle for their lives was just beginning. 6 months after Victoria's death, Richard discovered that building a life was harder than building a business, but infinitely more rewarding. The FBI investigation had made national news for 3 weeks running. The Victoria Files, as reporters called them, brought down 2 judges, a state senator, the police chief of Atlanta, and 17 other officials across Georgia and Florida. The corruption network Victoria had documented reached deeper than anyone had imagined. But Richard and Yolanda had managed to stay mostly out of the headlines. A few photos of them leaving courthouses, some mentions as key witnesses who provided evidence, but nothing that made them famous enough to be permanent targets. Now, standing in the kitchen of their new house in Asheville, North Carolina, Richard watched Yolanda teach Marcus how to make her grandmother's recipe for black beans and rice. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that it still surprised him sometimes. More cumin, Yolanda said, guiding Marcus's hand as he seasoned the pot. Your dad likes things spicy. Everything okay out here? Richard asked, joining them at the stove. Marcus is learning to cook something besides cereal and sandwiches, Yolanda replied, bumping his shoulder with hers in the casual way that still made his heart skip. The house wasn't a penthouse, and it wasn't a mansion. It was a 4-bedroom craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch and a backyard big enough for Yolanda's kids to play soccer. Richard had sold his hotel chain to a competitor, keeping enough money to live comfortably, but not so much that it attracted unwanted attention. How's the job search going? Marcus asked, stirring the beans with the concentration he used to reserve for video games. I have 3 interviews next week, Richard replied. 2 with hotel management companies, and 1 with a nonprofit that builds affordable housing. The nonprofit job was Yolanda's idea. After watching him spend 6 months trying to figure out what to do with his life post-hotels, she'd suggested he use his business skills for something that helped people instead of just making money. You've been taking care of rich people's comfort for 20 years, she'd said. Maybe it's time to help working families have a decent place to live. The idea had grown on him. Using his knowledge of construction, permits, and property management to build homes for people like Yolanda's family felt like redemption for all the years he'd been blind to how the other half lived. Have you ever started completely over in life? What was the hardest part of rebuilding? Dinner smells wonderful, Yolanda's daughter Carmen said, walking into the kitchen with her younger brother close behind. At 15, she'd grown 3 inches and gained the confidence that came from having adults who listened when she talked. How was school? Yolanda asked. Good. I got elected to student council. Carmen grinned. Apparently, being the new girl who's not afraid to speak up is an advantage. Richard watched the easy interaction between Yolanda and her kids and felt something he'd never experienced with Marcus when he was that age. Family dinner conversation that wasn't rushed or distracted by work calls. The simple pleasure of being present for the small moments that made up a life. Marcus, how's physical therapy? Yolanda's 10-year-old son asked. Getting better. The doctors say I should be back to playing basketball by next semester. Marcus had struggled more with the emotional aftermath of Victoria's drugging than the physical effects. But months of therapy had helped him process the trauma of learning his mother wanted him dead. Will you teach me to shoot free throws? Absolutely. Richard stepped out onto the back porch while the kids finished cooking dinner, needing a moment to appreciate how far they'd all come. 6 months ago, they'd been running for their lives. Now, they were arguing about homework and planning weekend hiking trips. Yolanda found him there a few minutes later, settling into the porch swing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. "Just thinking about how different everything is. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine life without the hotels, the penthouse, the whole Atlantis scene." Richard sipped his coffee and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Now I can't imagine going back to that life." "Any regrets? About Victoria? About the investigation? About selling everything and moving to North Carolina?" Richard considered the question seriously. "No, not a single one. Even about me? About us?" Her voice carried the slight uncertainty that still surfaced sometimes when she thought about the gulf that had existed between their old lives. Richard turned to face her fully. "Especially not about us." The kiss was soft and sure, tasting like coffee and the kind of contentment that came from choosing love over fear. They'd been married for 2 months now, a simple ceremony in the backyard with just their kids and a few friends. But Richard still marveled at how right it felt to wake up next to her every morning. "There's something I want to tell you," Yolanda said when they broke apart. "What's that?" "I got the job." Richard stared at her. Yolanda had been interviewing with the local community college to teach computer classes, putting her self-taught skills to use helping other working adults learn technology that could change their career prospects. "When you start?" "Next semester. 2 classes to begin with, but they said if enrollment is good, they'll expand the program." Yolanda's smile was bright as the sun set behind her. "I'll be teaching people like me. People who never thought they were smart enough for college, but who know more than they realize." Pride swelled in Richard's chest. Not the professional satisfaction he'd felt when closing business deals, but the deeper joy that came from watching someone he loved step into their power. "We should celebrate." "We are celebrating. Every day we wake up safe, with our kids healthy and happy, in a house we chose instead of running to. That's celebration enough." As they sat on the porch swing watching the mountains turn purple with approaching night, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Williams. "Last of Victoria's hired guys convicted today. It's finally over." Richard showed the message to Yolanda, and they sat in silence for a moment, letting the reality of true safety settle around them like a blanket. "It's really over," Yolanda said quietly. "The old life is over," Richard agreed. "But the new one is just getting started." 2 years later, Richard discovered that the best security system wasn't cameras or guards. It was a community that chose to protect each other. The community center in East Asheville buzzed with activity on Saturday morning. Richard walked through the main room, checking the progress on the new computer lab that would open next month. 15 workstations, high-speed internet, and software designed to teach job skills to adults who'd never had the opportunity to learn them. "The contractors say they'll be finished by Wednesday," Yolanda said, joining him in the doorway. Her arms were full of folders, lesson plans for the expanded computer program she now ran at 3 different locations. And the funding? Fully covered for the next 2 years. The hotel foundation came through with a matching grant. Richard smiled at the irony. The nonprofit foundation, funded by his old hotel chain, was now paying for programs that help people like Yolanda build better lives. It felt like completing a circle that had been broken for too long. "Mom, can you help me with this?" Carmen called from across the room, where she was setting up chairs for the weekend GED prep classes she'd started volunteering for. "In a minute, baby." Yolanda turned back to Richard. "Marcus called this morning. He got into Duke. Full scholarship, full ride. Basketball and academics." Pride glowed in her voice. Marcus had not only recovered from his trauma, but had channeled it into determination to help other kids who'd experienced family violence. His college essay about surviving his mother's murder attempt had impressed admissions counselors across the country. Richard felt the familiar swell of fatherly pride mixed with amazement at how resilient teenagers could be when given the right support. Marcus had spent the past 2 years in therapy, community service, and basketball, transforming his pain into purpose. "Where's he spending the summer?" counselor training at a camp for at-risk kids. He wants to work with children who've been through family trauma. Through the community center windows, Richard could see his stepson, Yolanda's younger boy, playing basketball with a group of other kids on the outdoor court Richard had funded. The boy who'd been 10 and scared when they'd first met was now 12 and confident, his laughter carrying across the parking lot. What's the most important lesson you've learned about protecting the people you love? Share your wisdom below. There's something else, Yolanda said, her voice carrying the tone she used when she had news that would change things. What kind of something? She handed him an envelope with a return address of the Georgia Department of Corrections. Victoria's personal effects. They're finally releasing them to next of kin. Richard stared at the envelope like it might bite him. 2 years after Victoria's death, he'd thought he was done with surprises from his former life. Do you want to open it? Together. Inside was a short letter from the prison administrator and a single key on a chain Richard didn't recognize. The letter was brief. Personal effects of the deceased include one safety deposit box key. Bank information attached. She had another safety deposit box, Yolanda said, reading over his shoulder. In Savannah. Bank she never mentioned to me. They looked at each other with the same question in their eyes. After all this time, after all the investigations and trials and FBI raids, what could Victoria have hidden that no one had found? We don't have to go, Richard said. Yes, we do. Whatever it is, it's better to know than to spend the rest of our lives wondering. The drive to Savannah felt like traveling backward through time. Richard hadn't been to Georgia since the FBI investigation concluded, and seeing familiar highways and landmarks brought back memories of the life he'd left behind. Some good, some terrible, all complicated. The bank was small, private, the kind of place that specialized in discretion for wealthy clients. The safety deposit box required 2 keys, the one Victoria had left behind, and one the bank manager produced after checking Richard's identification against the signature card Victoria had filed years earlier. Inside the box was a single manila envelope and a letter addressed to Richard in Victoria's handwriting. My dearest soon-to-be ex-husband, if you're reading this, then you've survived everything I planned for you. Congratulations. You are always better at long-term strategy than I gave you credit for. The envelope contains something you'll need to understand about your new life with the cleaning lady. She's not who you think she is, Richard. She never was. But then again, neither was I. Consider this my final wedding gift. The truth about the woman you chose over me. All my love, and I do mean love, Victoria. P.S. Check the date on the employment application Yolanda filled out when you hired her. Then check the date she moved to Atlanta. The timeline might surprise you. Richard's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside were copies of documents he'd never seen before, background checks, employment records, and a photograph that made his blood freeze. Yolanda, 3 years younger, standing outside his hotel in Miami. 6 months before she'd answered his ad for a house cleaner in Atlanta. She was watching you before she ever applied for the job, Yolanda said quietly, reading over his shoulder. But as Richard studied the documents more carefully, he realized Victoria's final revelation wasn't what it seemed. The background check wasn't done by Victoria. It was done by Yolanda herself, researching the man whose ad she was about to answer. The photo outside his Miami hotel wasn't surveillance. It was Yolanda visiting her cousin who worked in the kitchen, trying to learn what kind of employer Richard was before she moved her children to a new city for a job. You checked me out before you applied to work for me, Richard said. I had 2 kids to protect. I wasn't going to move them across state lines to work for someone dangerous. Yolanda looked at the documents with a wry smile. Victoria found out about my research and thought it proved I was running some kind of con. Were you? I was being a smart single mother. There's a difference. As they walked out of the bank, Richard realized that Victoria's final attempt to destroy his relationship with Yolanda had backfired completely. Instead of revealing something sinister, she'd shown him that the woman he'd married was exactly who he'd thought, someone who'd do anything to protect her family, including researching potential employers and moving across the country for a better opportunity. One more secret revealed, Yolanda said as they got in the car. The last one, I hope. The last one for Victoria. But I'm sure we'll have plenty of our own secrets to discover over the years. Richard started the car and pointed it back toward North Carolina, toward their house with the wraparound porch, toward their kids and their work and their complicated, beautiful, chosen family. Any other confessions you want to make while we're in the mood for complete honesty? Yolanda grinned at him, and for a moment he saw the fierce, determined woman who'd saved his son's life and brought down a network of corruption through sheer stubborn refusal to let evil win. Just once, she said, I never did like cleaning your house. I just liked watching you try to figure out how coffee makers work. Richard laughed, and the sound carried them home. The end. Thank you for joining Richard and Yolanda's journey from employer and employee to partners in every way that matters. Their story reminds us that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we've never truly seen. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more tales of unlikely love, hidden strength, and the power of choosing each other against all odds. And remember, everyone has a story worth knowing, especially the people you see every day but have never really noticed.